Got one. Good morning and welcome. I'm Tommy Jackson with Pinnacle Bank, and we're proud to be the sponsor of this breakout session. Briefly, I'll give you a little description of Pinnacle Bank and who we are. We were founded in 1934 in Elberton, and we're still headquartered in Elberton. So we've been at it for 87 years and have grown the bank to $1.7 billion. We pretty much cover the northeast quadrant of the state, ranging from Blairsville up north and to the east to Augusta. We have 29 branches. I believe we might have 30 now because we bought a bank last week. But we're in 22 different communities throughout northeast Georgia. So we're very much committed to the community banking model. In fact, our vision statement is to be the best community bank in Georgia, and we've got over 300 people working daily to make that happen. So again, we're proud to sponsor this event and want to introduce our speaker today, which we're excited to have. I know when you hear Creature Comfort, that it perks a lot of interest, at least it does for me. But we're proud to have Fenwick Broyard, who is the VP of Culture for Creature Comforts Brewery and has been a long-time community leader in Athens and has served on the Get Comfortable Advisory Council since its inception. He helps to build professionals and create the kind of environment that draws the best out of individuals, the kind of place Bulldogs want to work. So let's welcome Fenwick.
Even when they're short, introductions tend to create some bigger footprints than you think you can step into. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to our sponsor for creating a space for us to have the conversation today. I'm very much looking forward to talking to you. Like I said in my initial remarks, I'm not representing Creature today necessarily. I did not bring any beer, do not have on any paraphernalia, but absolutely am an employee over there, and that company will factor in a bit into what I intend to talk with y'all about here today. Begging permission of any who would be offended by such a thing, I would actually like to open with a word of prayer, which is simply that something I say here today will be of benefit to any one of you gathered here today. For not being nearly so accomplished a business mind as any of the speakers today, I feel compelled to open with the words of two other leaders upon whose thought I intend to lay a question. Mine is a question with which I've been grappling for the better part of 20 years, whose current iteration is perhaps the most incisive it has been across its long evolution. Mine is a question equal parts provocative and blasphemous that I hope you will at least entertain. And so as not to be needlessly coy, my question is, can a business be a church? Now, before you attempt to stone me, or at least to run me out of this assembly, I hope that you will allow me to at least lay the foundation upon which this sincere inquiry rests. While I recognize that few have entertained such a notion, I hope you will allow me to explain how I came to, which I will do upon the foundation of two business minds that you've at least heard of, if not respect. For when asked to define what a business is, no less a business mind than Elon Musk said flatly that he did not actually know what this thing called a business is. All a company is, he said, is a bunch of people together to create a product or service. There is no such thing as a business, he went on, just pursuit of a goal. A group of people together for the purpose of pursuing a shared goal. And to that seemingly innocuous admission, I'd like to add the perspective of Patrick Lencioni, who in his book, The Advantage, said a business's purpose should be just shy of, we exist to improve the world. Combining the two, we find that a business is a group of people gathered together to improve the world, which at its most basic level is, in my estimation, the very definition of a church. By which I mean that there is equivalence between the idea of the church and that of business. But friends, I'm not here to argue the ridiculous notion that all business are essentially churches, but rather to commend to you the unavoidable fact that for millions of Americans, including your employees, your business is, in their minds, the closest thing to a church that some of them come. My case rests on the assertion that there are three human needs which the church exists to fulfill, those being the need for belonging, the need for contribution, and the need for a sense of meaning. And while it is true that the church has traditionally served as the site of fulfillment for these needs, there is underway a transition which bears import for you leaders and to which I would now call your attention. For according to the Pew Research Center, the religiously unaffiliated share of the American population, which consists of people who identify as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, now stands at 26%. This is up from 17% in 2009. In other words, the percentage of the population referred to as religious nuns is up 10% in the last 10 years. Especially among millennials and Gen Zers, this trend is expected to continue well into the future, and it could very well be that by the year 2029, 1 in 3 American workers will be a religious nun. Now this, I think, is important to us based on one historically inarguable truth, that the need for meaning doesn't disappear with the end of one's allegiance to a site of encounter. In other words, just because people don't go to church doesn't mean that they are released from the need for meaning, and the fact is that the religious nuns do still have the needs that the church has historically filled for millions. Appreciate you, brother, thank you. I was hearing too much feedback. For absent a belief in divine power, these three principal human urges do still persist. And it is a truth that a place where all three can be met can be mistaken by some for a church. And as we stand on the precipice of the purpose-driven as well as the green economy, I commend you, friends, that to compete in the coming court of opinion, business is going to have to look a hell of a lot like church. Now, as an institution, it is interesting that business has been on an opposite historical trajectory than the church. For while the advent of e-commerce has untethered business from the bound of location, there is among believers today a regrettable equivalence between the idea of the church and the space. Further, while the size and influence of the church have been waning in raw historical terms, the force known as business has gained precedence and now occupies the position long held by the church. It is business that now exerts world-shaping influence over global politics, the land, and economy, and it is business which currently holds the reins of the purpose of existing to improve the world. Now, before I go too far down such a blasphemous path, I suppose I should share with you a bit of my story. For in truth, it is my own journey which has led me to the point of plying the intersection between these two ideas. And though I would not, like Thoreau, speak so much about myself if I knew nearly as much about another subject, in this case, I hold that my own journey is instructive for understanding how one arrives at such a question as mine. Now, I will not tell you my whole story, but rather the relevant phase of my journey, which actually starts with a fateful encounter with the red-letter version of the Bible. 22 years ago, I was told I was going to hell by a Christian friend to whom I admitted I didn't know what I believed. You're going to hell, I was told, summarily and unfeelingly and detrimentally to my own person. Condemned, I went and bought my first Bible to make sure that such damnation was not what Jesus had in mind. And so I bought a red-letter Bible from Barnes & Noble, determined to read only the words of Jesus. I opened to the book of Matthew and to the first instances of red, and I read them straight through as though I was in an extended and ongoing conversation. And by the time my dialogue with Jesus had finished, I was thoroughly convinced of two things. One, he was the dopest dude that ever lived, and two, that every church I'd ever been to had it all wrong. It was Emerson who said that we worship Jesus' tropes and not his actual teachings. And it was in this conviction that I found myself grounded after my life-changing seminal reading of the Gospels. But of all the soul-stirring teachings of this man, there was one that stood out for me as inescapable. For the phrase that echoed and still does in my mind is the idea that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. What I find curious about that passage is that with one change of preposition, we might have a totally different faith. For if it had been the kingdom of heaven is in hand, I suspect we would have long ago recognized the need for our involvement. For my own belief is that Jesus' desire was that we would actualize his vision and not become so heavenly minded as to be of no earthly good, but to help build the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. The church, I was convinced, had gotten it all wrong in choosing to chase the heaven that Jesus asked us to create. But you can imagine being struck with such a fervent conviction at so foolish and tender an age. However, the 20-year-old me had at least the humility to conclude at the time that I didn't belong standing in anybody's pulpit. I also computed the odds stacked against me and realized I would have been a lone voice crying out in the wilderness. For as far as I could see at the time, the church was undergoing a resurgence with the advent onto the scene of the megachurch. And so rather than throw a rock at Goliath and try to turn millions of minds towards a new interpretation, I chose instead to attempt to walk out what I perceived to be Jesus' mission to the world. Essentially, I decided prior to encountering Lencioni that my own personal purpose would be to improve the world, for at the time that felt like the best thing I could contribute towards heaven being realized on earth. I sought expression for this desire initially and most committedly in community development and public service. And with these being the province of the not-for-profit industry, I spent 12 years leading nonprofit organizations. And it was near the end of this decade-long season of service that the precursor to my current question emerged. For in my last seat as the executive director of a local nonprofit organization, I started asking myself, is a nonprofit really any different from a business? Not-for-profit, I was admittedly slow to discover, did not necessarily mean allergic to profit. It simply meant that as a matter of course, all profits had to be reinvested in the improvement of the service. And it was armed with this idea that I set out to identify a revenue generator for the agency I was running. I spent the better part of 2 years essentially ridding my agency of the requirement of private donations, primarily because it was I who was allergic to fundraising and who cared more about the work than raising money to do it. Now, across the street from my nonprofit was a church whose pastorship opened up not long after I took the job at my agency. And actually, I gave several days' consideration to applying based on a second question I found myself then asking. For what I saw in the church through my professional lens was the most perfect nonprofit ever devised. A volunteer base with a mission as grand as any and a budget as deep as one's vision could inspire. So I spent 2.5 of my 3 years in that job looking longingly across the street, wondering what it would be like to have a literal army of volunteers who could all be compelled by belief to do good. Such was my yearning that it only took a piece of misplaced mail for me to decide to head off to seminary. And it was only in my second year in seminary that I made a final and fateful discovery. For it was while fulfilling my internship requirement that I discovered that many churches are little more than businesses. In fact, some of them are businesses that spend way too much on overhead and on improving their physical plant. For the idea of the church, even in the minds of some of its leaders, is that the church is the building of the gathering, and literal thousands are spent on new pavement and pews while hundreds languish in poverty. And in more instances than I care to recount, the church's purpose seemed to be improvement of the church. What I had believed to be the greatest organ for community change turned out to be an institution with the same politics and self-preservation instinct as any other human-created entity. But rather than wallow in the heartbreak of this discovery, I instead allowed myself a blasphemous question. I wondered if a church was little more than a business, then could a business then be a church? Thankfully, 3 years in a university-based seminary at least taught me a little Latin and Greek, and so I'll flex that very meager muscle at the outset of this short response to the question just asked. For the word that we translated as church is from the Latin ecclesia, which is a gathering often, but not only, for the purpose of religious services. In essence, an ecclesia is a coming together or a gathering of people around a purpose. A group of people gathered together for the shared purpose of pursuing a goal. When you add the particular goal of the church, which is the improvement of the world, you end up at the combination of Lencioni and Musk, which is what we started with in the beginning, in that all a church or an ecclesia is a bunch of people together to pursue a purpose. It is the body or the corporation of Christ, whose purpose, in Lencioni's words, is to improve the world. The church, therefore, is a business with a purpose which Lencioni would have us assign to all businesses. For according to Lencioni, all business should have as its purpose for existence the improvement of the world. In fact, one of the core functions of the ecclesia was that provision be made for all members of the body, and the church amassed and distributed the resources resulting from the productive labor of the gathered. And for centuries, the church held the keys of the economy, and it was primarily responsible for stewarding the earth. It was, for all intents and purposes, the first ever B corporation. But the church's capacity for good never reached the proportions now available to the leaders of business, who now function as the primary stewards of the world, if for no other reason than the scale of our impact. And while it is most certainly some distance to cover still towards closing the stewardship gap of business, there is at least to be found in our tradition foundation for the necessary sacralization of work. For it was the father of most of your faith, the German theologian Martin Luther, who is said to have set the world on fire by democratizing religion and sacralizing work. For it was Luther's translation of the word from which we get liturgy that some say set off the Industrial Revolution. For Luther chose from among the meanings of liturgia the literal translation, which is the work of the people. Friends, the word from which we get liturgy and worship literally translates as the work of the people. And so you can see how in the theology of the Reformation, a person's work was reckoned as an offering to God. Work took on a sacramental aspect in the wake of Martin Luther's thought, and a consequent rise in artisanship and industry forged the very paths you business leaders walk. In other words, people found meaning in their work through demolishing the line between the sacred and the profane. Our forebears blurred the lines between church and work, blending the latter into the vintage of the former. And it is in this moment that I believe that we are currently standing under a similar call over us all, albeit with a reversal of the process of absorption that took place hundreds of years ago. For whereas it was the church that previously absorbed business, sacralizing the latter in that exchange, I hold that it is now business which is assuming the functions of the church, making them more relevant and impactful in this exchange. And for the increasing subset of the American population who identify as religious nuns, the need for belonging, contribution, and meaning all get projected onto the contemporary workplace. For some, there is no other place than the workplace where they gather in what could be called ecclesia, and so they bring to their work their needs for purpose, contribution, and for belonging. Business, or work at least, is church for an increasing subset of our population. So much so is this the case that the first funeral I ever led took place inside a craft brewery. It was during my first semester while away at seminary that I received a call from an old board member. She had waited as long as she could before reaching out to tell me that her husband had disappeared. He had left a goodbye note and driven off into the mountains without his wallet, his phone, or his meds, and the 2 weeks that had lapsed since his disappearance led even his wife to conclude that her epileptic husband was likely dead. She said something during our first call that I'll never forget and which I'll share with you today. She said to me, I was the closest thing to a minister that she or her husband had in their lives. The former executive director of the nonprofit on which she had served as a board member was the closest thing to a minister that this incredible human had. And so she turned to a first-year seminarian who didn't even have a church home of his own at the time. For her part, she had no obvious faith home and only the makeshift minister that turned out to be me, and so we planned and delivered this man's memorial at the only place in his life that he held sacred, which was the cellar at the downtown brewery location of the Creature Comforts Brewing Company. Now, it helped that a few months earlier, I had been introduced to the idea of brewery-based worship in the form of an event I attended while on a recruitment trip to Vandy the summer before going up there for seminary. The event was billed beer and hymns and frankly fulfilled both of its brand promises, for I was handed a beer and a hymn book on entry and walked into what felt like a normal tap room. But as the night went on and the brew continued to flow and the songs crescendoed into pitches of fervor, a bar was bathed in the spirit A tap room became a tabernacle, and there was not to be found a dry eye among those who had gathered. I remember looking to my right during one particular moment and finding the face of a beautiful girl who stood weeping with her face to the sky and the most contented smile I believe I've ever seen. And with the same or some version of that look characterizing all of the countenances I saw around me, I remembered entertaining the thought, blasphemous though it seemed at the time, that that brewery was holy ground. And so it was, armed with this experience, that I suggested that we plan the memorial at Creature Comforts. For it was also the case that this man's former co-workers were also reeling from his disappearance. I knew enough about that company to know that there were many in their ranks who would have to overcome past hurts to attend a church. And so they became ecclesia in pursuit of meaning and belonging with those who shared with them their sorrow. I watched two exclusive circles become knit into one body at the brewery-based celebration of this man's life, as tragedy drew forth ecclesia into the site and assembly of a local Athens-based craft brewery. But not only did it become a site for shared meaning, but the company also morphed into a prime site of care. For counseling services were provided, and community gatherings were held, and the leadership became deacons for this family. Creature even brewed a beer in his honor, which it named Cellarman's Spirit in honor of his position. But it is what it chose to do with the proceeds from this beer that, for me, made Creature start to feel like a church. For 100% of the profits, literal thousands of dollars, were set aside to seed a college fund for the departed's only son. And friends, I have to tell you, I've been to many memorials at many, many churches, including some that were well off, but I've never seen a church wrap a family in care the way Creature Comforts did for this man's. Neither have I ever been to a service so diverse where a spiritual fellow feeling so deep was achieved, for I saw a cellar converted into a cathedral and watched ecclesia form in a tap room in Athens. And I emerged convinced that that was holy ground for that man always and for us on that day. All of which, friends, is not to exhort to all of you that you invest in converting your business into a church, but rather to suggest to you that there are some, even possibly on your own staff, for whom your business is the closest thing they have. Therefore, as you attend to them, see to it that you provide more than just a sink for the expression of their contribution, but that you also attend to the meaning and the belonging in their lives, or prepare to be uncompetitive for the forthcoming workforce. For the next generation of workers, the workplace is ecclesia, and the closest thing to church that many of them come. Thank you. I was told we might have some time for questions, and I realize that is probably a difficult thing for y'all to ask questions in response to. So I warned y'all, man. Y'all came, right? Like, you could have turned the channel. Like, I told y'all this was going to be like biography and sermonette and exhortation. And so, yeah. But anyway, I'd be happy to entertain any questions if there are any. If not, we can all just go have some coffee together. Anybody have any questions about any of that or all of that or challenges they want to offer? Yes, sir. I think I understand what you're saying, and I will say in response to that that is something that, like, our company is attempting to figure out, right? Like, I don't think that there's an easy solution to this. I think this is a problem that, like, we are standing at the beginning stages of and not even fully recognizing the depths of. But I can tell you that at our company, I'll just speak into some of the challenges that we've had in contending with this reality, that we've got a group of workers who are seriously impassioned about any slight or injustice they see happening in their workplace. Because, again, for them, this is the space that they expect to come as close as they can to, like, beloved community. So, like, understanding that you bring this, the idea that, like, this is work and you take care of your other needs outside, right? Like, leave your personal at home and bring your work to work. Like, those boundaries are disappearing. And I think young people in particular, and I'm thinking about specific employees of ours, because we have an incredibly young workforce who are wanting to bring the entirety of themselves into their workplace, right? And right now, there's a moment in time in which they're encouraged to do exactly that. So I'm not here to say like, oh yeah, you do these 5 things and like it's gonna be easy to address, but my objective really is to just sort of like herald, like, hey, guess what? Next generation workers are like coming in looking for this, whether they can articulate it or not, right? Like that's the key, is nobody's coming in and being like, I need for this place to be, but then you start talking to them and realize, oh my God, like you are trying, it's like people who try to get all their needs met by their partner, right? It's like, I can't be everything for you, but I think increasingly over time, what we're observing and what I think will continue to be the case is that for next generation workers, like, I need my business to be the place that I come that gives me fulfillment. I need for it to be the place that I come where I have friends. I need for it to be the place that I come, right, where I feel a sense of purpose in my work. And so more and more companies, like everybody's developing purpose statements, right? I think behind that is this idea that like there's a generation coming up that is expecting that. And in the same way that we have to be mindful of how we're perceived publicly in terms of our social and environmental commitments by the consumers, we also need to be mindful of that in terms of our like ability to recruit and attract talent. Because I'll say from Creature Comforts perspective, one of the things that is right now, basically what has become a new part of our like comp package is the Get Comfortable program. Like we have people coming all the time and we ask them in the interview process, what made you want to work at Creature? And it's like, it's the Get Comfortable program, which is our like corporate social responsibility programming, right? Which is very visible and people are drawn to. We've got applicants, anecdotally, I would say, because HR sits under me, I would say probably 40 to 50% of applicants, when asked, respond that that's one of the reasons that they decided to apply. So what I'm suggesting is, right, that like understand that the next generation workforce is looking for that in your place of business, whether you're prepared to provide it or not, and maybe start thinking about how you can go about providing it, you know? Were you throwing your hand up? No, I was talking to this guy. Yeah, what's up? Mm-hmm.
What cautionary things would you pose to businesses where you've seen the church fall into certain trying to be everything?
That's a great question. I mean, there's plenty that business can't do that business can't point to the transcendent, right? So like, don't even try. I'm not, beer and hymns is a cool thing that happens, but no brewery is putting that out there like, hey, we have church at our space, right? Like the ones that I've attended are like, there's a group of people who organize that and they happen at a brewery and it works, right? But like breweries aren't out there like, yes, we are where you can come and have all your spiritual needs met, right? So I would say like absolutely stop short of that line, like even pretending to have that, right? And in fact, being mindful of the fact that like even suggesting that you're trying to do that could be a turnoff to some people, right? Because what makes this attractive as an alternative to church is that it doesn't feel like church, right? So like, and I think for those of us who would identify as Christian, right, it's like you start saying you need to look more like the church, the way we think of it is in this way. Oh, we got to convert people. It's like, no, what was the original church, right? Like the original church gatherings were, they called, like what we celebrate as communion was originally love feast. It was a potluck. They just made sure everybody had enough, right? So like in the way that business shows up and engages in this way, it's like identifying a core sense of purpose for your business, for yourselves and for your employees, right? Like I love Lencioni, you might disagree with him, right? But like this idea that, yeah, your business should exist to improve the world. Whatever product, if you're putting a product in the world that is not improving the lives of the people who are consuming it, then you've got a problem on your hands, right? And so you could frame your mission or your purpose in that way and really just kind of challenging your leadership to think in that way, right? So that you build a culture that is reflective of that. I think cultural change happens at the top, at the level of leadership, when people start thinking in the appropriate ways, right? And if you get leadership functioning in lockstep, programming starts to develop that's consistent with that. But if we are running a business and our purpose is to make money, word to the wise, you're gonna have a hard time attracting next generation talent because they're not in it for that. Right? Like one of the tools that we use in the leadership framework we roll out to our employees is called the Peace Index. Giant worldwide is the leadership company we work with. And there's the Peace Index, inside of which there are 5 principal areas that you're tracking employee satisfaction. Managers meet with their individual reports, right? So you're looking at purpose, provision, place, people, and physical health. Across the board, the people who work for us are willing to trade all 4 of those other things for purpose. If they got purpose in their work, provision, place, people, and physical health are less significant than if they feel a sense of purpose. If they're lacking that purpose, then it doesn't matter how high their pay is or how healthy they are or how much they like their coworkers, right? Like, purpose is becoming a new form of currency. And I think that would be my signal message, my sort of primary message would be recognize that and leverage it to your benefit. Yeah.
So how does this concept, this message, translate from being internal for your own culture
Yeah.
to your customers and to the general audience?
Yeah.
How do you communicate that?
Frankly, you don't. I mean, here's what one of my coworkers is famous for saying: we want to be seen doing good, not doing good to be seen, right? And so if your mind goes straight to how are we going to get the customers to know we're doing this, stop, right? Like, do what needs to be done for your people, and your people will become the tellers of that story. There should not be a marketing campaign around we are taking care of our people. You know what I mean? Like, invite your people into the process of building the culture that they want to work in, and you will have no shortage of people who will know that yours is a different kind of company, right? Because, I mean, Arthur Blank in the book Good Company suggests, right, that like customers will only be treated as well as the employees are. That's one of the reasons I think Chick-fil-A does so well, right? Like, if your employees are feeling maligned and overlooked and not respected or cared for, they are not going to project to your customers those attributes and experiences that would have your customers raving to return to you. So to answer your question, yeah, how do you get the customers to realize it? You start by creating that reality for your people, and the customers will feel it by extension. You got a follow-up? Yeah.
That is how you create that sense of belonging, contribution, sense of meaning
Yeah.
for your customers, not as much as a marketing tactic,
Yeah.
as a way to extend that to them.
Yeah.
Customers feel that same loss. To your point,
Yeah. Yeah.
provide.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess in that, yeah, so I appreciate that reframe because that's a different question, right? So I think, yeah, in that case, then you invite them on your journey, right? Like, you don't have to hide it either, you know? Like, we just went through a process at Creature where we took our sort of like, our values, right? We have our corporate values and we created a code of conduct. It's like, here is what, these values are awesome and we love them, right? Like, extend kindness, right? Like, crave curiosity. All, what does that look like in practice, right? Let's operationalize that. So we created a code of conduct so that our employees understand, here's what we mean by each of these things. That code of conduct is visible to our customers so that they understand what we mean by these things. And the standards of behavior that we hold our employees to are the same standards of behavior we should hold our customers to. If we say as a company internally we are committed to the idea of extending grace and not passing judgment summarily on people, we're not going to let customers come into our place of business and do that, right? It's like, again, to point back to Chick-fil-A, they're closed on Sunday. When they decided to do that, everybody was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this, you're gonna lose so much money, right? It's like, no, but then you take a principled stance and you communicate that to the people and they respect you for that stance. And I think the next generation consumer, much like am I saying that right? Much like the next generation employee is looking to align their dollars with companies whose vision and values they align with. Gone are the days where you just buy a product because it's the coolest one. There's too much competition now. And there are plenty of businesses that are jumping out and securing things like B Corp certification who can put that on their packaging, non-GMO. Like, think about all these labels that are coming now. Like, that's what's going to drive purchasing. Right? So making these commitments internally allows you to achieve designations that will drive customers to you. Because like B Corp is one of, like Ben and Jerry's, you put B Corp in there, people are like, I know what that is, increasingly, right? Like, not as much as non-GMO, not as much as like USDA organic, but like those labels, unfortunately, man, I think there's probably gonna be a proliferation of labels in the next like 20 to 30 years, right? Like, this one's green, this one's this one. It's gonna be like flair on a jacket on people's packaging, right? But customers are looking for that now. Next generation customers are looking for that now. They're not buying from people they don't align with. They're not buying from people whose footprint in the world is not in keeping with their own commitments to the environment and community. And B Corp, I think for that reason, is a fantastic thing for companies to consider pursuing, or at least applying for, right? Get the baseline, get an understanding of where you sit. Does that answer your question? Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can we talk about retention?
Huh, yeah.
First of all, I love that you talk about business and church being somebody who's been in business for a long time. It feels almost offensive that you would think that they would we're asking, like, how can we institute these kind of principles in our business? And it's like, well, just love the people. But when you, as a business, decide to step into a new trajectory like this, you
Yeah.
decide to have this kind of awakening, how do you look at the new people that are coming in and seeing the needs that they have and still take the people that are currently there that have been comfortable
Yeah.
how you've run things, and maybe you've like fostered stagnancy in the way that they're looking for things. It's like bridging the gap
Yeah.
and getting people there.
Yeah.
Because I know, especially with the pandemic, you know, there's labor shortage everywhere. And I'm a solopreneur, but my husband works in a hospital, and it's like you can't keep it. But people also realize they don't need 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah.
With what they've had. So how do you implement these principles to welcome in new people that need the business, need the job to be more than it is, while also continuing to nurture the people that are there and kind of catch them up?
Yeah. I think you invite the existing employees into the process. This is not something that gets done on their behalf. Like when we created that code of conduct document, we got cross-functional representation at like all levels throughout the company. Our CEO was there, our COO was there, our marketing director was there, some folks from our production, you know what I mean? It's like, bring them into the process. If you take a top-down approach, then yes, you're gonna lose some of the existing people, especially if what you're proposing represents that significant a departure from what you have been, right? But if you invite them into the process, and also open book management style, just be transparent. Like, it's not, hey, we're gonna do this because our CEO thinks this is the thing we should do. It's like, yo, here's what's coming, right? Like, let's look at these statistics together. Let's talk about this. Like, let's understand that there is a generation of young people who right now we can see the evidence that their purchasing is being driven by their commitments and their values. It is only a matter of time before they become the workers. And they're gonna be looking for that in the business. And so if we want to be competitive and to continue to exist as a business, frankly, it's a matter of survival. It's kind of like DEI. Or environmentalism, right? It's like if you were putting your head down and hiding your head in the sand like an ostrich in the face of all of this stuff, you're asking for all of those people that you're afraid of losing to eventually not have jobs. So it's really creating a sense of urgency for them. Like, we need to do this, and you won't feel it immediately. I'm not suggesting that like 2 years from now, you're gonna be like, man, we can't hire anybody, right? I'm not suggesting that, but millennials and Gen Zers are the people. Some of them are in grad school right now. Those folks are coming out, right? And they're looking for jobs, and they're demanding of their workforces and creating friction internally when they're not getting it, frankly. They make a lot of noise, you know? They're feeling very empowered, which I'm happy about. I just think that we need to be prepared for the fact that that's coming. So I think to answer your question, it's helping the people who work for you currently understand why you're trying to do what you're trying to do, and then inviting them into the process of like facilitating that change so that they don't feel left behind or forced upon. Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
I was curious, and I don't know how long you've been at Creature, but I'm curious if that's always been a part of the culture, or if that's something that was recognized, and if there was something that initiated this
Yeah.
in terms of caring for people, and kind of, and what it sounds like is you've really got some vision as to kind of this next generation
Yeah.
and take care of them. I'm just curious as to
Both and.
initiated that.
I mean, both and, right? Like, Chris Herron, our CEO, who is like a business maverick, sat on the board of the nonprofit that I mentioned in my talk, right? So he and I became friends back then. And Creature had just gotten to town. He had just taken the job. They were getting started. He told me at the time that his objective was to be the best place to work in Georgia. He presented to me this sort of visual of the sort of Champagne Tower, right? So they wanted to be an industry-respected craft brewery, which is also in our mission statement, right? And he wanted to be the best place in the world to work. So in his mind, if we achieve those two things, if those become the glasses we pour into, if we are the best place to work and our people go and tell our story in the community about how great it is to be here, more people will want to come here and work for us, and we will achieve the level of industry respect because we'll be able to draw in the top talent. So on one hand, yes, from the beginning, but that is not to suggest that it was like perfectly formed, right? Because then you start bringing people in, and then you start understanding, oh my goodness, okay, hold on, like there's a lot. And I think craft is a unique space too. It's a very unique space. So this might be, perhaps y'all could think about this, if you work in like tile or like, or roofing, you might be like, this man is crazy. I would just tell you, maybe craft beer is like canary in the coal mine, because the young people are coming to us right now. Like, we are the hot thing everybody wants to do. Eventually, they'll tire of us, and they'll be wanting to go and do something else, and they will have acquired some skills. And what they're going to take with them is this expectation that business look like this. So yes, it was from the beginning something we were committed to, but then again, I don't think business should wait. I don't think any business should wait until a situation like the one I talked about with that funeral to realize that, you know, because that was the takeaway. It was like, this is this man's church. Like, where else are we going to do his memorial? He's got no other place in the world that he treats with this level of reverence, right? And so much of his identity, so much of his like well-being was connected to that space because he did not have this other entity meeting those very vital human needs, right? And I guess what I'm attempting to argue is that he's not unique at all. There are a lot of young people who don't have connection to the church right now and have church hurt that they're overcoming. But that need for a sense of meaning, belonging, and contribution does not go away.
I think you nailed it. I really appreciate the perspective because I work with a lot of young people, right? And we are so far from the days of our parents.
Yeah.
They could be in a job for 4 years.
Right.
Right? At most, you may have two to seven.
Yeah.
Right? So we have another generation coming in who's disconnected from the church, who's disconnected from structures, who's just in some aspect, I'm just trying to get money and I don't even understand my purpose.
Yeah.
So you bring a perspective of how do we transform sort of a business into a place where a person can, one, find some aspects of purpose,
Yeah.
and then how do you take this purpose and move forward?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate
Yeah.
that.
I think too, man, and I feel like I should say, right, that I don't think it's enough to have a well-written purpose statement, right? Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I think you have to sincerely be for that overall purpose of improving the world, right? And what that looks like for your business can be determined by you and your business. It's not, I mean, our purpose statement is we exist to foster human connection. That's not what's bringing people to us. What's bringing people to us is that with the money that we are earning, we are turning around like so Get Comfortable, that program I'd mentioned quickly, has been around for 6 years. In 6 years, $1.5 million have been mobilized and distributed in this community to support the work of local agencies. Like, and this year we're entering into a new situation. Like, we're committing the 1% to the planet, right? It's like that kind of stuff that I'm talking about. It's like, what kind of neighbor are you in the community in which you're located? Is your community getting better because your business is growing? And to the extent that that's true, people will want to work for your business. Nobody's interested in helping a business grow if first of all, frontline employees are not receiving any dividends. So if I'm not going to benefit from the company's growth and it's not going to impact my community, then this is a job. This is not a career, and a damn sure ain't a vocation, right? So you're going to get my 8 hours and then I'm out, or I'm going to make your life hell because I'm unsatisfied and I can't even articulate the needs that I have. I'm just like creating friction, right? Yeah.
So you talked about the comfort program and how long it, when you guys started, I know you still said is it the belonging, the contribution, and the meaning, is that part of the comfort program?
No, this is like, this little belonging contribution to meaning is a framework I created for this talk. that has nothing to do with the Get Comfortable program. The Get Comfortable program's objective is to steward the resources and generosity of the many towards the areas of greatest local need in our community. So we've essentially built, what's that? Yeah, sure. To funnel the generosity of many towards the greatest local needs in our area. So there's an opportunity. We have at this point, Creature Comforts was sort of the flagship organization that helped start the Get Comfortable program. At this point, there are about 50 businesses who are partnered with us in that ongoing effort. So Your Pie is a part of it. We've got SurveyMonkey. We've got a bunch of folks who have lined up with us and said, you know what? Rather than us try to figure out how to direct our dollars and really have it be done based on like any of our sort of like personal passions, y'all have this infrastructure now through which you're able to identify, looking at data with an advisory committee, what everybody should be directing their dollars towards, and we're gonna contribute our money towards that effort and really align all of these resources to be able to make maximal impact as opposed to all of us shooting our money off in all directions. So contribution, I guess, is happening through Get Comfortable, and I would say, yes, some people are finding meaning working for Creature knowing that that's happening, right? Belonging is something we work on completely separate from Get Comfortable, and it's just a part of like the cultural work we do.
Right, and that's great, but my other question is, when you're managing millennials, because, it's a little different than when I
Yeah, to put it mildly. Absolutely.
and you have to adapt with it as well. But my question is, do you ever get any pushback from the employees saying, hey, what about us? If you're like you said, the
Yeah.
difference, like I don't see anything, and yeah, it's great that you're doing that, but what about
Yeah.
us? And number two, do you ever take any introspective with the employees where you ask them, like, what could we do different?
Absolutely. For them, like on their behalf? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the reality of it is, so the program that is now Brew for One, there's a program that we do every year where one individual gets identified from the agencies and we come alongside that person and do something awesome. That program started as a result of what Creature did for this man's family. So the program started internally. The next year, there was another employee whose brother, I believe, had like cancer, like it was operable, thankfully, but they were struggling to pull together the resources. So then we brewed a beer and donated the proceeds to that individual, right? So yeah, absolutely, you have to, your people, we are at the, I mean, part of what we hope to be the case at Creature, and the evidence bears it out, is that we want it to be the case that a job at Creature represents the sort of life change that we're offering to some of these other folks through our giving, right? So we strive to make sure that our wages are competitive, that people are well compensated for the work that they're doing. We've got programming internally like Smart Dollar, which we partner with Ramsey Solution. We do financial development, leadership development, all of these services that we offer to our internal employees, such that, yeah, it's not, well, when is it my turn, right? It's like, if you're asking that, then we're not paying you enough.
And so that brings me to this.
Yeah, yeah.
We've had people that we've interviewed, and what they want to start out with is like how do you determine your wages competitive based on it?
We look, I mean, so we got industry standards, and we look at, like, in the state manufacturing for a business of our size. But like craft beer is its own industry, and so there's a craft beer HR group that we're members of that we're able to get sort of like salary censuses from to look at our compensation across craft breweries. But then we also look at some of y'all. We look at the manufacturers in this space too, and it's like, yeah, where are we relative to some of the other folks in our industry and in our community? So the combination of those two is how we determine where our wages are going to fall. But I mean, I hear you. Yeah, people coming in. I mean, that's been a part of that, as you can imagine, right? Like, we are a small brewery in Athens, and there are big breweries in Denver, Colorado. And when we open positions, some of those folks apply for our positions, and then they come, and it's like, what they're looking to make is not where we're at, right? We have, though, been successful, frankly, in presenting this business as a bit of a lifestyle change. Like, the people who work for us, especially those who have come from other craft breweries, are happy to report that the quality of their lives improved when they started working for us, because we are being as intentional as we are about meeting their needs and ensuring that our benefits packages align with what they need most. So we have that as an additional benefit to offer, that your work-life balance is going to be healthier because we require it here. And we've created the sort of environments inside of which employees feel they can, again, part of it, this is where it's a double-edged sword, right? Like, we've absolutely set ourselves up. We're like, we've got ways for people to anonymously bring things to our attention, and there's like all these platforms for people to communicate, and sometimes it's like, oh my God, like, can y'all just be happy with something? But then it's good because then you get to filter that, and like, there are some meaningful ideas in the feedback that you receive.
I'm sorry for another question.
No, you're good. Nobody else has their hand up. It's all good.
How do you get them to actually present issues that they have? Because
Yeah.
we try, like we really try.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, everything's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. You come alongside and you come from behind and you create opportunities for anonymity. Like, we had an anonymous comment card, which gave people the opportunity, and it was virtual. So there was no way for us to come back and trace it. You're not going to recognize my handwriting, right? So it's like, we gave people a chance. Like, just tell us what's going on. Tell us what you think we need to know. And then it's our job to go through. And granted, yeah, I mean, it's a lot to go through, right? It absolutely is. But like, I mean, that's one of the ways. Also, yeah, you can't have their line manager asking them how things are going, or their line manager's boss, right? Like, you've got to create forums for those conversations to happen. I would say maybe even bringing somebody in from the outside where they get to feel a sense of safety, or having something happen off-site with a group of employees so they feel even safer to be able to speak freely if you really want to know the information, right? Like, there are plenty of strategies.
Well, when you don't have a lot of, when it's just like it does have a little bit more than
Yeah, yeah.
Even if you do virtual, you can kind of point out and be like, I know what that is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you do anonymous, like, just submit your responses to this thing, right?
You're just afraid that it's still possible to figure it out.
Yeah.
That's one of the hard part that we're trying to do now.
Yeah.
To be honest,
Yeah.
they're like, you're going to know what's
Yeah. So then the question for y'all to ask, right, is why don't they trust us? Like, why is it that That's, it's like, I know that's not my ringtone. That's awesome. In the back, because I know we're actually at time. There's something happening at 12, right? Okay, cool. I don't want to miss because you had yours up patiently. Okay. Yeah. 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 Exactly. Yep. 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 Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. 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 So there's a baseline level of distrust, right? That folks are bringing with them into their interactions with the workplace, and absolutely, to your point, like we need to be mindful of that, not be dismissive of that. I myself am 43. I argue that I'm not a millennial, but truth of the matter, yeah, welcome, right? Exactly. I think I'm like a year or two away. So yeah, I don't. My desire is not to disparage at all. It is frankly to just like, this is what's coming, and frankly already here in some cases, right? And part of what might just seem like, man, this is a difficult employee, could actually be this person needs more. They need more than you realize an employee would need from you as a place of business, because their need isn't being met anywhere else. So I think we should probably wrap there because we are over time. But I do thank y'all for bearing with me and appreciate y'all for